Mr. Perry Jewell, it's often said that the need for an immigration policy in Australia is that Australia has some moral responsibility to the world to have an open door policy. Where do you say the morality really lies?
Candidly, as with most things in life, you can have two aspects on morality, one of convenience and one of difficulty. The fact is, though, that surely, morally speaking, we have a primary duty to our undereducated, our less fortunate people. I mean, for instance, we have fourth world conditions, forget about third world conditions, prevailing in some of our Aboriginal camps. Surely our duty is at home in our own backyard, primarily, before we think very arrogantly that perhaps we can address the problems of Africa. Has anyone got any idea of the immensity of Africa? I happen to have been raised in Africa. Africa with 53 countries, an overall population that must be around the billion mark, rapidly increasing. The more aid they receive, the more diseases are conquered. And we arrogantly think that with our 20-odd million people, actually it's not even 20 million if you discount the several million immigrants and refugees that have been dumped into this country in recent years, do we really think we can solve Africa's problems in Australia by importing something that will become definitely a social problem, not to mention the 100,000 immigrants and refugees that were allowed into this country, known to be suffering from diseases such as tuberculosis, leprosy and AIDS. Now this I have extracted from our national newspaper, The Australian, and this was actually a Liberal National Party government that allowed these numbers in between 2001 and 2007. That is why our hospitals are overloaded. The other aspect on this is that when you allow a highly qualified black or Indian person into Australia to set up their business, be it a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, or whatever, or indeed the students that come in here and receive an increasingly mediocre education from a system that's vastly overloaded. When you do that, in actuality, you are robbing those third world nations of their intelligentsia.
So you're actually saying that the robbing of the third world of their intelligentsia is a type of moral crime?
Yes, it certainly is. We live in an age of self-gratification where everyone's supposed to be able to get everything they want. But what do you think it does to that poor little African village? And as I said, I've spent more than 20 years in Africa. What do you think is the effect of taking the, if you like, the one bright intellectual spark out of that community? The little kid who was clever enough somehow to come through with perhaps a pretty modest diet, very mediocre opportunities, maybe lucky enough to go to a mission school, and it just had that extra spark that sadly so many people in the third world don't seem to have. Took advantage of every opportunity and perhaps scavenged a few more, ended up going offshore, whether it was the United States, Britain, Germany, France, Australia, New Zealand, it doesn't matter. Availed themselves, and all credit to them, of that education that perhaps a lot of our kids are too lazy to take. Nevertheless, once that is through, that person becomes a doctor and hopefully trained to a decent standard. You can argue the pros and the cons as to whether that we shouldn't have made our children, our youth, work harder and longer, but now we have a situation where we've got a highly qualified person who is fluent in a third world language, comes from the third world and is allowed to remain in the first world. What we have done effectively is rob that third world nation, that little community, of their hope of the future.
So you're saying also that the overseas students who have come to Australia for an education should indeed return home to their countries?
Most assuredly. And I'm saying this kindly, perhaps inducements could be given, but the fact is it's not working. If you wish to look at any of the first world nations that have imported many and varied peoples from the third world. Most of them are approaching sociological disaster stage.
You've indicated that you've obviously lived in Africa and in other countries. What role and function do you put on the need for cultural homogeneity for a people?
Well, I'm speaking in a country that is not known for its Christianity. Indeed, we've elected we've just had imposed upon us an atheist prime minister. But the fact is, if God created man, he created many different races with many different talents, aptitudes and abilities. Who are we to try and scramble this mass of humanity into one multicultural omelette? I don't think it works. I think it's a tragic loss of peoples from different places, countries, origins, and to me, we've gone the wrong way. Internationalism is not working. Internationalism is crunching nationalism with catastrophic results, and multiculturalism is one of the weapons these increasingly unelected governments are using.
If Australia had cause to have any immigration at all, and there is an argument that we should pretty much terminate immigration, what would the true function of an immigration policy be?
The primary function of any immigration policy should be of benefit to the host nation. The moment we move away from that primary principle that the host nation must be the principal beneficiary, all the host nation can do is become increasingly weakened by what is a parasitic industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jewell, for those thoughts.
I'm not sure if I'm looking in it.
You are, and we'll cut this bit out that we're recording. You say that immigration has a downside for Australia. Where do you see those downsides actually taking place?
Threefold, really. Firstly, if you're worried about your elderly parents not being able to get adequate and timely hospital services, there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the principal reason for the overloading of our medical systems and services is in fact the huge number of people that are allowed into this country suffering from seriously communicable diseases, and in actuality in earlier ages of immigration, such as when I came in the early 70s, you were actually sprayed before they let you off the aircraft. Now I find it hard to believe they've let people in with tuberculosis, and I've got every sympathy for people from the third world. In the plantations that I used to help manage, we had a massive problem with tuberculosis, but we certainly wouldn't have believed anyone with tuberculosis could be brought into a country as an immigrant. Better to build a sanatorium in those countries. There used to be one in Tanganyika called Kibungoto. A friend of mine's father used to run it. And it's not a question of being unsympathetic, but it's a question of being rational. For instance, a trapeze artist apparently has been allowed into this country, a fellow from Africa, who's contaminated 37 women with AIDS, and maybe the number's still climbing. Apart from the moral aspects of that, there are the medical aspects. And if we have to talk dollars, isn't it appalling that someone can go around and create an ongoing medical bill for eternity, as far as we know, until as and when and if a cure is found? Then the other spin-off, of course, is you get ghetto areas developing. Some of the third world peoples have a history of drug use and what we would term abuse. Nevertheless, they've lived with these things for centuries, and they expect to in this country, so it's exacerbating the drug situation, which again spins off into additional medical costs. The other factor is the cost of real estate. Candidly, a young Australian couple now, unless they're extremely well paid and employed, have got a snowball's chance in hell of buying a home. That is terrible in a nation so big, so large, and supposedly with so much opportunity, that in actuality our own people are experiencing an increased rate of homelessness. Even some of the working poor cannot afford even to rent a home or a room, incredible as it may seem.